Now we'll get into the fossil record. This is what we're looking at tonight. Dinosaurs and fossils, all that fun stuff that kids love. Which is funny because Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, all that stuff is kind of dying down now. I'm sure it'll revitalize again, but everyone's interested in dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are so cool. They're look at that. That looks cooler than any animal we have. We have chickens and stuff. So before we start, I want to look at something. It's kind of a game, I guess, a little bit. I'm going to show a couple skeletons. And based on those skeletons, I want you guys to guess what kind of animal it is. There might be some kind of easy ones. There might be some hard ones. But they're all real animals that still exist today. They're still alive. They're not extinct. And I want you guys to see if you can guess which ones they are. Woo! Who's that animal? This one, the first one. Anyone have a guess what this might be? Hippo? Anyone have any other guesses? It's not a boar. It's not Pumbaa. It's a hippopotamus. Really easy, not too difficult. You can see how similar they look. That one's not too hard. What about this one? Anyone have a guess? You said ostrich. Anybody agree or disagree? Emu? Okay. Anyone else have any other ideas? Lots of birds in the world. Ooh. It's a turkey. Anyone guess turkey? Doesn't look like a turkey, does it? When you looked at, we'll get past the yummy dinner. What's that? For an emu? Oh, thank you for that scientific lesson. Yeah, so it doesn't look like a turkey because there's a lot of features of a turkey that you just don't recognize, you don't see. You don't see all that fatty tissue. You don't see those big feathers. You don't see the gizzard, that little part. You don't see it. It's not present there. But it exists. Again, look at the color. How did you know that's the color of it? You just don't know. Based on those skeletons, you can't tell. What about this one? You probably think it's the same one. It's actually a different bird. Flamingo, okay. Anybody else? Platypus is not a bird. Thank you. A duck, okay. Anybody else? Did anyone guess peacock? So obvious. Isn't that obvious? You can tell it's a peacock. You can tell by all the feathers, the little crown on its head. You don't see that stuff in the fossils. We'll talk about that later. What about this one? Anybody guess? Platypus. Anyone disagree with that? Yeah, Perry the platypus. Yeah. Yeah, it's a platypus. Ooh, it skipped ahead. Yeah, that's what it actually looks like. Yeah, you see that there's some that look very similar and some that look very distinct. Platypus are very weird creatures. Anyone want to guess what this one is? Anyone say what? Anybody? Nothing? Sloth, okay. It's a live animal. It still exists today. It's got big old buck teeth. That's what you look like if you have buck teeth. Beaver? Okay. Neanderthal. Get out of here. Beaver? Is that the best guess? Anyone guess porcupine? That was obvious to me. You could tell because all the little spines. Again, notice those special features you just don't see. I must be the beaver because we think of the beaver has those big teeth. They have the same kind of teeth, like that. They're really small, not exactly the same, but they're similar. But you don't see all that kind of other stuff. How would you guess this based off of that? You probably wouldn't. You might say it's a cat or a dog of some kind unless you look at that thing. What about this one? Anyone have a guess? Nico's got all sorts of guesses. Anybody want to guess anything? It's a live animal. It's real. It exists today. A bear? That's your guess? You want to guess a bear? Any kind of bear? Koala. Anyone have a guess besides bear? Triceratops. Oh, you're so close. So funny. Oh. Panda bear. Yeah, there you go. I have a lot more pictures than I thought. Yeah, it's a panda bear. You can kind of see that resemblance there a little bit. It obviously kind of looks like a bear with the kind of big features. You think of animals with big kind of features like that, you might think a bear. What about this one? Oh, stingray. Yeah, that's pretty good. Anyone else? Flying squirrel. Clarissa needs to go back to school. All right. He's right. Yeah, stingray. That one. So obviously we know, one of the things that's interesting to note, we know what that is, we know what it looks like, because we've seen stingrays before. We've seen manta rays, we've seen porcupines, we've seen panda bears. If you've never seen a stingray, what would you guess this is? If you've never seen, let's say you're inland, you don't really see a lot of fish kind of sea life. Are you going to guess this is a sea creature? What if you found it inland? You're going to think, what is this flying thing that goes around and say a UFO or whatever? There's a lot of stuff we don't know based off of bones, and we'll go on that later. This is a bonus one. This is my favorite animal. I don't know if you guys will ever get this. It's a very specialized name. But do you want to guess what kind of creature it is? What you might think it is? A sloth? A lemur. Oh, that's pretty good. Anybody else? Iguana. Nico needs to stop talking. It's a kinkajou. You probably wouldn't have guessed it. It's this like weird looking monkey cat thing. They are adorable. Look at that. Yeah, it's cute. I love the way they look. But no, what would you not know about the kinkajou based off of the bones? You wouldn't know it's orange. You wouldn't know its tongue's length. You wouldn't know the ears. You don't see ears in bone. It's cartilage. You wouldn't know the color of its eyes, the color of its nose, the color of its paws. You wouldn't know where the fat is. You wouldn't know how loose the skin is. Or one thing with bears is bears have a lot of loose skin. That's one of the reasons they fight each other. Their claws don't really dig into each other. It kind of slides because the skin moves with it. With us, we bleed a lot because our skin is very taut. With bears, it's not the case because they have that kind of movement. The same thing with cats and dogs, stuff like that. You won't notice that based on the bone, which I think is really interesting. This is funny because we know what these creatures are. Maybe you guys don't know this one, but the other ones we looked at. We know what these creatures are, yet some of them give us a hard time. Those birds ones look exactly the same to us. But yet they're two different kinds of birds, almost exactly identical they look to us. They're completely different. So how can we know what fossils look like now based off of what we have then, you know? There's a lot it's all guesswork. A lot of it, again, it's based off of assumptions. And that will tie in near the very end of all these lessons when we look at different things. I don't want to spoil it now. So then the question becomes, what does the fossil record tell us? I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the fossil record. Oh, the fossil record. And you're thinking, man, it must be so in-depth and so unique. All the fossil record is, it's a record of death. That's all it is. Where things died and what things were preserved after they died. Just because something's not found in the fossil record doesn't mean that it didn't exist. One thing we'll look at a little bit later on is how rare fossilization really is. People think, oh, we'll follow fossils all over the place. And it seems like, because all we see is fossils, again, the idea that we have so much news and so much access to other parts of the world, we think there's so many fossils. They're all over the place, and there are a lot of fossils. But in the grand scheme of things, they're very minor, and we'll get to that. I don't want to spoil it now, how many that actually get fossilized. But it's very minute compared to how many creatures existed in all of human history, in all of Earth's history, and how many get fossilized. Again, it's just preservation of death. Things that died and that got preserved. That's all it is. It's nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. It also just shows where they were buried. And so this kind of shows a generalized idea that you have more basic life on the bottom, and then it gets a little bit more, what's it called, dynamic, or it gets a little bit more complex, advanced. Yeah, Josh, use some big words. And it gets higher upwards, so you get like to mankind and more complex animals and stuff like that. Things with weird tongues and all that. And so that's kind of the way to present the fossil record. But the fossil record isn't like that. We don't have this perfect thing. We have some areas over here in the world where we have some stuff like this, and maybe it's layered like that. We have other places in the world where these things are layered like that. Another thing is it's all, again, based on assumptions. How do you know that, let's say this is, I don't know how many layers that is, 10 or so. Let's say there's 10 layers, and these 10 layers get laid in 1,000 years. It takes 1,000 years to lay these 10 layers. And over here in this other place, in part of the world, we have 10 layers get laid also. But how do we know that those got laid and it took 10,000 years for them to get laid, and it took 10,000 years for those to get laid? What if it's 75 layers got laid in 10,000 years, and this one is only 10 layers get laid in 10,000 years? We don't know. It's based on some assumptions. Well, we think it's similar because the rocks are similar, yet there's only 3 types of rocks if you don't know that. There's igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. Those are the 3 types of rocks. Oh, those rocks are similar. Well, great, yeah, there's not that many options. You only got 3. Yet we say, oh, they're so close. It shows a snapshot of history. And now it's good. Again, it's good for relative dating. It's good for assumptions. Maybe this is the oldest one. Maybe that's the youngest one. But again, those are assumptions. You do not know. One of the things I keep on coming back to, that's why I kept this up here. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I did all these things? Not just Job, where were you when I created everything? But you can think about it with us now. Where were we when all this history happened? We weren't alive back then. We don't know. Again, we're basing a lot of this stuff on assumptions. I think this is accurate. I think this is how it's occurred. But we don't know for sure. Yes, so this is what they say. They say, the fossil forms that occur in the rocks, however, provide the chief means of establishing a geologic timescale. We looked at that quote last week. So basically the idea is we look at the different strata, and the way we understand how old that strata is based off those fossil forms. And we'll talk about that as we continue on, because there are some issues with dating fossils. In my notes, I talk about something called the Poisson exponentially weighted moving average. We won't get into that. It's a probability density function and all that kind of boring stuff. It's interesting to me, but basically it comes down to this. when it comes to everything we know that happened in human history, about 5,000 to 6,000 years, all that stuff, if we date anything within that time frame, we can almost certainly know exactly how old that is. Almost with 100% certainty. We're pretty exact with that. It's almost 100% accurate. Because, again, we use carbon dating, which carbon dating is very accurate within 5,700 years. So with that stuff, we're pretty much almost certainly sure that that's how old that is. Once we get past that, it's all assumptions. And that's basically what the whole thing in my notes says. They have all these different issues with variables and that kind of stuff. You don't find that within that time frame. Outside of that, it starts to go all over the place. But we trust it because we have different dating methods, and we'll talk about those. So the half-life of carbon-14 is only 5,730 years, so carbon-14 dating is only effective on samples that are less than 50,000 years old. That's kind of interesting to me. Less than 50,000, it only goes up to 5,730. Less than 50,000. Again, we all agree, everybody agrees, if it's in this time frame, 100% accurate. Yet scientists will also say, well, it's also accurate there as well, even though it's already decayed past that. But they give their reasons why. I don't think they're very good. There's trace amounts, but then they argue against trace amounts with other things. It's a strange kind of thing. But whatever, they accept it because they believe the Earth is billions of years old. It goes on to say dinosaur bones, on the other hand, are millions of years old. Some fossils are billions of years old. To determine the ages of these specimens, scientists need an isotope with a very long half-life. Some of these isotopes used for this purpose are uranium-238, uranium-235, and potassium-40, each of which have a half-life of more than 1 million years. Again, talking about that uranium to lead, potassium to argon. But there's issues. Unfortunately, these elements don't exist in dinosaur fossils themselves. Each of them typically exists in igneous rock or rock made of cooled magma. And here's another issue. Fossils, however, form in sedimentary rock. Sediment quickly covers a dinosaur's body, and the sediment and the bones gradually turn into rock, but this sediment doesn't typically include the necessary isotopes in measurable amounts. Basically, in order to get the age of fossils, we can't date the fossils themselves. There's no more carbon-14 in there, according to them. We can't date the sedimentary rocks the fossils are in because it's sedimentary rock. The sedimentary rocks are a bunch of different rocks that come together, kind of get glued together, basically. So you can't really get an exact date because you're going to date this part of the rock that's from over there 1,000 years ago. This part of the rock is over here 100 years ago, and it's all over the place. You can't get an exact date. So you can't date the sedimentary rock. You have to date igneous rock. But fossils don't form in igneous rock because igneous rock comes out with magma and that kind of stuff, and any fossil that was in there would have been burned up. So you have to date, in order to date the fossil, you have to date the rock that's near the rock that the fossil's inside. Just something to note. Kind of strange. Another issue with dating rocks. Yes, don't date rocks, they're too old for you. An issue with potassium-argon dating is that contamination issues can make it unreliable. Potassium-argon is one of those ones they say this is a very accurate one, yet it's not as accurate as uranium-lead. They actually don't like to use potassium-argon that much anymore because of this idea with contamination issues, meaning that it's more likely to be contaminated than the other kind of forms of radiometric dating. It's more likely to give up unreliable dates, which we don't want. We don't want different kind of dates. We want something that's consistent, and that way we know it's reliable. But then there's also issues with uranium-lead dating. We already looked at the issue with carbon-14, that of course being it can only go up to 5,700. The issue with potassium-argon is it has unreliable dates because of that contamination. And issues with uranium-lead dating, leakage adjustments make it consistent but not necessarily accurate. So with uranium-lead, the issue is there's some problems with the radiation, how it leaks out, and how you're trying to calculate how much is leaking out and how much is actually decaying and all that kind of stuff. So they make adjustments in it mathematically, and they say this is how we know we can determine it to make it consistent. Again, the issue is what are those adjustments based on? If those adjustments are wrong, even though the dates may be consistent, they are consistently wrong. Again, it's based on assumptions. Well, we don't know exactly what it is unless we change it. So if our model is based off of 1 million years old, it will consistently give us a date of 1 million years old. If our model is based off 100 years old, it will consistently give us a date of 100 years old. That's kind of how it works with those leakage adjustments. So basically, if we know the Earth is old, we'll adjust it to make it old. And then we're clear. But why do we know the Earth is old? Well, because it proves it's old. But it proves it's old because you're adjusting it for it to be old. Here's another quote that kind of ties into that. The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. If you notice, how do we know how old the rocks are? By the fossils. How do we know how old the fossils are? By the rocks. If you notice what that is, here, I'll draw it out for you who are a little bit slow. Ooh. We have the fossils. That's an ugly looking thing. Don't look at it. It's disgusting. The fossils, and then we have the rocks. And so what you have is the fossils date the rocks. That's how we know how old the rocks are. And then we use the rocks to date the fossils. And that's how we know how old the fossils are. And then in turn, we date the rocks by the fossils. And we date the fossils by the rocks. And you know what? We're going to switch it up. We're going to date the rocks by the fossils. We're going to date the fossils by the rocks. And then we're going to go back again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And what we get is circular reasoning. We know exactly how old it is because of what the other thing is as old as it is. And we know exactly how old that is based on the other thing that we just used it to guess on, which is crazy. So basically what it comes down to is we have one type of dating method that's reliable, which is the uranium-lead. But it's only reliable in terms of consistency. It's not exactly reliable unless you adjust it. And then we use that to date one type of rock out of the three, to date a substance, which is in a different type of rock that you can't date, neither the substance or the rock. So we use one dating method on one type of rock that's near a rock that has the fossil inside of it, and that's how we know exactly how that fossil is. And then we use that fossil to date that rock that's next to that rock that the fossil's inside, that we only use one thing to date. Again, it's crazy. This is what you look into. Yeah, everyone says we have radiometric dating. It's very accurate, very reliable. That's what we use. And we have fossils, and they call things like index fossils. That's how we know this, and we'll talk about that at the very end. That's how we know exactly how old this rock layer is, because it's in this index fossil that we have dated to be millions of years old. Again, that's dated based off of rocks that are dated off of fossils. And it ties back into what we looked at last week with the geologic timescale, how it already existed. The geologic timescale already assumed old age before they even had radiometric dating. I already think it's old. That's why everything's adjusted for it to be old. It's all based, again, on assumptions. And so we'll look at some of those now. If it will show. There we go. So here's some unreliable radiometric dates. There's a freshly killed seal, was carbon dated as having died 1,300 years ago. A living mollusk shells were dated at 2,300 years, still alive. One part of the Volosevich mammoth carbon dated at 29,500 years old, and another part dated at 44,000. Same mammoth, different dates for different parts. One part of the Dima, a baby frozen mammoth, was 40,000. Another part was 26,000, and the wood immediately around the carcass was 9 to 10,000. That's a lot of different dates for one thing that's in the same spot. The lower leg of the Fairbanks Creek mammoth had a radiocarbon age of 15,380 radiocarbon years, while its skin and flesh were 21,300 radiocarbon years. The flesh is older than the inside part of it. Strange. How did that happen? Here's some more. The two Colorado Creek AK mammoths had radiocarbon ages of 22,850, and then it says a plus or minus, and 16,150 plus or minus. Again, it's a plus or minus hundreds of years, which is quite a lot, but whatever. But notice the difference, 22,850, and the other one is 16,150. These were found right next to each other, buried at the exact same time. But one of them is much older, not in terms of how old it was when it lived, how old it was when it died, and yet they both died at the same time. Here's another thing. 11 human skeletons, the earliest known human remains in the Western Hemisphere, have been dated by the Accelerator Mass Spectrometer. All 11 were dated about 5,000 radiocarbon years or less. Again, going back to what we know about radiocarbon, it's accurate within what? How many years? 5,700. And this one was dated 5,000. We checked the oldest known human remains in the Western Hemisphere. Those things should be millions of years old or tens of thousands of years old, however you want to say how old humans are. They're always changing on how old they think we are. But at least 10,000 or so years old by the time they came over to the Americas. But 5,000 radiocarbon years, that's what we used when we found radiocarbon. Unreliable, don't trust this one. Let's look at the other ones that date living creatures as 20,000 million years old. Another thing, lava from the 1801 Hawaiian volcano eruption gave a potassium-argon date of 1.6 million years old. 1801 Hawaiian volcano eruption, that stuff just came out, just formed. And one of the things about igneous rock, when it forms, it comes out of that magma, it's almost like a reset. All that energy and power makes it, you can't tell how old it was before that as it got turned into that magma. Once it cools off, now you can tell exactly how old it is. And they determined exactly how old it is, 1.6 million years. As soon as it came out, it got dated. Basalt from Mount Kailua Iki, Hawaii, in AD 1959, gave a potassium-argon age of 8,500,000 years old. 1959 just came out, already 8 million years old. First birthday, and you're 8 million. Basalt from Mount Etna, Sicily, AD 1972, gave a potassium-argon age of 350,000 years old. Again, all these things coming out really quickly, but that's how we know it's reliable, because it's inaccurate. So here's kind of the summary of it. If you use radiometric dating on samples of a known age, it does not seem to work. Those humans, 5,000 years, I don't think so. No, it's not possible. Those mollusks, we know how old those mollusks are. They're fresh, they're still alive. It's not working out. The mammoths, we know we lived with mammoths. It's not working out. It's got the ages incorrect. But when you use, if you use radiometric dating on samples of unknown age, it's assumed to work. How old is this specific dinosaur? How old is this specific fossil that we don't have any record of now because it's been extinct for so long? It must be millions of years. How do you cross-reference that? You can't. You can cross-reference the other stuff we just looked at. That's when we know it's incorrect. So on the stuff we know how old it is, it's incorrect. The stuff that we can't cross-reference, it's correct. Of course it's correct. Again, isn't that kind of strange? But that's what we find. The radiocarbon stuff is great, but once you get past that, you have to go to that other stuff, the potassium, argon, lead, uranium, that has issues, and with stuff that you can't cross-reference, so you just gotta, I guess it's true. The adjustments must have been correct. Again, that all based on assumptions. Now going into fossilization, and this ties into a lot of the fossil record. So one of the ideas of the fossil record is it gives us a good snapshot of history. The issue is fossilization is very rare. So you're not gonna get every animal that ever existed. You may not even get every animal that ever existed in a certain time period. You may lose out a lot of animals. There's probably a lot of animals that went extinct that we don't even know about because they were not fossilized for whatever reason. And so probably only about 100,000 of the estimated 1,239,129 or whatever that is, living species of animals have a good chance of fossil preservation. This means that only 8% of the living species of animals have a likelihood of being preserved in sedimentary rocks as fossils. That's 8%. That's kind of how it's always been. They only have about 8% chance to be fossilized. Well, it's not 8% chance of, that means every single thing on Earth has a chance to be fossilized. It's 8% of all of them. What if it's 8% of only one kind? What's 8% of only a few kind? It's a few over here and a few over there. Fossilization is extremely rare. So there's a lot of stuff we miss out on. We wonder, why don't we find human fossils with dinosaurs? We'll talk about that a little bit later tonight. Well, because fossilization is so rare. You might not have a lot of humans fossilized with dinosaurs because we actually don't even have a lot of dinosaurs fossilized. Especially we don't have a lot of held together fossils of dinosaurs, which is another thing. We don't actually get a lot of fossils like this. That's really lucky, that's really nice. You got buried alive and everything got preserved, it all got fossilized. Sometimes it's got an arm sticking out. That doesn't get fossilized, that gets eaten up, it gets destroyed by the weather, so it's part of it. Other times it gets crushed by rocks and some parts of it get exposed and some parts of it go away, so we have bits and pieces. And we'll look at that, well, near the end of the whole thing with certain fossils that are very interesting. But preservation is extremely rare. Fossilization is rare. Most organisms decompose fairly quickly after they die. For an organism to be fossilized, the remains usually need to be covered by sediment soon after death. Sediment can include the sandy seafloor, lava, and even sticky tar. Again, how many things die and then get buried right away? Not a lot. Even things that we die, and then when we bury people, and even a lot of those things don't get fossilized because they're buried very high up, and that stuff can get exposed, or little organisms go in there and eat them because it's still pretty high up enough that living things are going through there. So a lot of things don't get fossilized. It just turns to ashes. You dig up a lot of these old graves, and there's not even bones there anymore because it just got dug to ash, or whatever, or dug to ash. It got turned to ash, and that's kind of how it goes. So one of the things they say is, well, that's why it's so rare. It takes millions of years. One of the reasons we know the Earth is old because fossils take millions of years to form. Everyone's heard this, right? You can't have fossilization immediately. I mean, when we die, we don't turn to fossils immediately. It must take millions and millions of years. It's not something we see occur naturally. However, there is an alternative explanation. This is something interesting to look at. If fossilization takes millions of years, why do we have a fossilized foot in a cowboy boot? And there's more than this. I just use this one because it's the nicest looking picture. There are a lot of little JPEGs that are so hard to blow up and you don't even know what they are. But we have fossils like this all over the place. There's people who have fossilized ancestors. And I buried my dad over here and I didn't know there's a river going through and all these minerals replaced it and half his body is turned to fossil now. It's been petrified. Petrification of trees and fossilization of animals is all the same thing. It's basically the bone or the organic life is getting replaced by sediments. It's not turning into rock, it's getting replaced by rock. But that stuff can happen. How does it happen that quickly? I thought it took millions of years. So here's one thing that's interesting to note. Scientists have discovered a new way to simulate the fossilization process in a lab in about 24 hours. They take materials like feathers, lizard feet, and leaves and cook them in a lab oven under heat and pressure conditions that mimic what real fossils undergo. Meaning, we used to think fossilization had to take millions of years. We used to think, oh, maybe you could do it at the most in 10,000 years, and then earlier on, maybe 1,000 years you could do it, especially when they look at trees. But we can do it in a lab in 24 hours. How do we do it in a lab in 24 hours? We have this special technology that the zapper and it turns it into fossils. That's not how it works. We increase the pressure and increase the heat to make it happen more quickly. Now, can any of us here think of something that happened on Earth that increased pressure and increased heat, something that was so catastrophic that happened so quickly that could quickly fossilize, bury a whole bunch of different animals all over the Earth? The flood. Again, when you look at a lot of evolution stuff, a lot of it's kind of explained with the flood. Because you have all that water raise up, all these animals die, And then it goes, as the water recedes, all that stuff falls back over it, and it buries rapidly everything else. All that pressure, all that heat that happened in the atmosphere, because all that water going everywhere, causes fossilization really quick. One of the things that the issues people have in terms of oil, right? We look at, oh, that's fossil fuels. We should have run out by fossil fuels by now. How do we have so much fossil fuel? Also to note, it's extremely long to turn fossils into fuel, right? Into the oil. You need a lot of pressure to make that happen. Even over millions of years, again, just as fossilization is rare, turning living organism things, organic material into oil is also extremely rare. You need all that pressure to squeeze it out and to turn it into that oil. This just doesn't happen. But yet, if you still have something like the flood, and it just rains down to everything, it pushes that pressure, that's a whole bunch of oil, it's a whole bunch of fossils, all those things happening very quickly. It helps to explain a lot of that kind of stuff. But of course, people don't want to accept that because the Earth is billions of trillions of years old. Because it has to be. Again, it's that assumption it must be in order for my worldview to be correct. At the very beginning of all these lessons, I talked about the 4 things that shape our worldview. One of those is, where do we come from, and why are we here, and what's our worth, all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the ways they answer, well, we came from nothing. So I have to explain it somehow. If you believe you came from nothing, you're going to look for an explanation that's nothing. If you believe you come from God, you're looking for an explanation that's God. That's kind of how it is. Our worldview shapes the way we look at the world. Obviously, that's our worldview. So then, what about dinosaurs? Everybody loves dinosaurs. I like dinosaurs. What do we do with those? How do we deal with dinosaurs? I don't see any dinosaurs. I've never walked out and saw a dinosaur. My grandparents didn't see dinosaurs. Brother Frank, who used to be alive, he used to be at this church. He used to say I was around when God made dirt. So if he was around, he'd probably know what a dinosaur looks like. But what do we do about dinosaurs? Haven't they been extinct for millions and millions of years? So there's 3 theories we'll look at tonight. One is that they did go extinct. They went extinct before mankind. That they did exist before mankind, and they died off, and then we came on the earth. And so a lot of people use the gap theory, which we looked at a long time ago, to explain this. How do we explain dinosaurs? They didn't exist with mankind because that's what the science says. Well, there must have been a gap in time where they all died because of Satan and all that kind of stuff on that old earth, and then he made a new earth, and then we still have the fossil remains. I don't believe that's possible. I don't believe that's true. You have issues with death and all that kind of stuff. But that's what people try to say, to include science with the Bible, make the Bible conform to what they believe the evidence says. Theory number 2. That's a funny looking fossil. The second theory is that dinosaurs never existed at all. The fact is, again, fossilization is extremely rare. It's also weird to note that fossils weren't really discovered until after the term dinosaur was invented. So you have the term dinosaur, and all of a sudden you find all these dinosaur fossils. Kind of strange, something interesting to note. And yet, you have stuff like this. You're laughing at it because it looks so silly. But what this is someone found a bunch of all these bones together in a certain area, close area, not exactly right on top of each other, but they found them all close. They put them all together, and this is what they had. How do we know all these bones are from the same animal? We don't. How do we know they're all from different animals? We don't. Because what do fossils tell us? That something died and it got preserved. That's all it tells us. So we don't know. I don't know how it goes together. How does it go together? It's all broken apart. It's all fragmented. Again, talking about how much fossils get preserved, it's, again, a lot of it's fragments. Even this is not actual fossil. It's not an actual bone that's been turned into rock. It's a casting. And a lot of these castings, if you may have noticed on the files, when the slides when I showed all the skeletons, some of them had these little bronze pieces on them with their claws or parts of their skull. That's because that's the missing part of the fossil. The actual fossil doesn't have that piece, so they fill it in. They want to show you that's filled in. A lot of fossils are like that. You look at a lot of the dinosaur fossils, the T-Rex one, oh man, look at that cool T-Rex. I can't believe we found the whole thing. Actually, we didn't really find that whole thing. We found bits and pieces of it, and we shaped the rest of it accordingly as we think it is. Again, based on assumptions. Not necessarily that they're wrong or not based off of educated guesses, but they're not exactly 100% true. We don't know if they're true. We have nothing to cross-reference them with. So you end up with things like this. And so some people believe that dinosaurs never existed. It was all just made up, and people made it up because Satan wants to convince the world that's a lie, which, I'm sure he would want to do that. But is that the truth? So we'll look at the last theory on dinosaurs. And so this is a very old cave painting. Yes, cavemen did exist because men like to live in caves. That's why we still have man caves and all that kind of stuff. But so this is a painting of a dinosaur. You can see it's very faint because, of course, paint fades over time. And so we have right here, it's harder to see here. It's easier to see up close. It's this dinosaur. It's basically this. This is what you see. And there's other stuff in the corner you can't really see. It's little people and stuff like that. And so these people who lived, ancient humans, right, living around doing their thing, they're painting little dinosaurs. Why would they be painting this? I just made this up. Look at this thing I made. It looks like a dinosaur to me, and this is not just, I have a whole bunch of other ones I wanted to show, but we don't have a lot of time, and I didn't want to put them all in, but we have stuff on pottery showing things that look like long-necked dinosaurs seem to be the most popular, probably because they're more docile than T-Rex and stuff like that. But we see a lot of these kind of dinosaurs, these kind of creatures on pottery. We see it on postage stamps that are based off of old stone carvings. And we see it on, in Babylon, there's, I think it was lions next to dragons. And that's something that Nebuchadnezzar made. And we have stuff it's on coins, and it's on rock carvings over in Egypt. Ancient Egyptians had that kind of stuff. And we also have all sorts of interesting things throughout history that show depictions of dinosaurs and depictions of things like that. But the issue that people have is, if they were really talking about dinosaurs, why didn't they mention them? If dinosaurs existed in history, why don't they mention them? They didn't mention those things as dinosaurs. They probably didn't call these dinosaurs, so they can't be real. The issue, of course, is that Sir Richard Owen came up with the name dinosaur in 1842. Of course, we should not expect to see people mentioning dinosaurs before 1842 because the word dinosaur did not exist. It's like the word YOLO. Nobody uses that now, but you wouldn't expect someone to use it back then because it didn't exist back then. They didn't use it. It's not real. But that's just how it goes. It didn't exist. But what word did exist? The word dragon, which comes from the Latin draconum, meaning huge serpent, which came from the Greek drakon, meaning serpent, giant sea fish, or giant sea fish. The literal sense of draken is suggested to mean the one with the deadly glance. It came to the English in the 13th century, which is the 1200s AD. And so we have a term used for these giant, terrible lizards, which would be dragon. So we'd expect to see something. If we're looking for a dinosaur, you're not going to find it. But if you look for a dragon, maybe you will. And so throughout history, we actually see a whole bunch of people mentioning dragons. People mention dragons all throughout history. You have, even in the Apocrypha, there's I think it's 2 extra chapters of Daniel that there's one story called Bel and the Dragon. It's about how I think it's Darius or one of them. He's like, I have this living God, and it's a dragon. And that's what it is. And in the Bible, I think the word dragon is mentioned about 34 times. Satan is a dragon. And when we think of dragon, we think of the big wings, we think that European kind of dragon. But when they thought of dragon, they thought of these kind of creatures, these giant, terrible lizards, these giant serpent things, which kind of ties in with Leviathan and Satan, and we'll look at that a little bit after this. Behold now behemoth. Let's look at Job chapter 40 and verse 15. If dragons exist, if God created dragons, we'd expect them to see them in the Bible. If they're dinosaurs, they're dragons, we'd expect to see them exist. And maybe we do. Job chapter 40 and verse 15. All right, so Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 24, it says, actually, can we have Brother Jason read that? My throat is gone. If you would.
Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto it. Surely the mountains bring forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares.
Interesting. So a lot of people look at this, and Jewish tradition has held that it's an ox or an ox-like creature. A lot of people also hold that it's an elephant or a hippopotamus. That's why you get something like this, which is like, oh, maybe it's an animal we don't know, but it's probably something like that. But there are some issues, if you noticed. One thing is to note is what God is saying about the behemoth. Before we look at anything else, he says, behold behemoth. And he mentions all these things about him. He's this great and terrible creature. Why would God say, look at this ox? You know how powerful I am? I made the ox. I mean, that's cool. Yeah, obviously God made the ox. But like, man can kill the ox. The ox, we've already domesticated the ox. No big deal with that. But here, it's interesting because what does God say about it? He eateth grass as an ox. So that's one of the things they look at and go, oh, like an ox, then it must be an ox. It says like an ox, not that he is an ox. Another thing is they go, well, look, it's really big. It's the strength is in its loins. It must be an elephant or a hippopotamus. But the issue is here in verse 17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. Also in verse 16, it mentions the strength is in his loins and the force is in the navel of his belly. That ties in not so much with these things. He moves his tail like a cedar. Does anyone know how big an elephant or a hippopotamus or an ox's tail is? It's this tiny little thing. It flies around. It can barely even do that. But he says it uses it like a cedar. What kind of creature ever existed that has a tail like a cedar? Well, we would say, oh, it gets cut off, but we would say it's a sauropod. It's this giant long-necked dinosaur. That's what a sauropod is. It's the long necks. We'd say it's something like this. I mean, look at that elephant. Tiny little thing. Look at that little tail. And look at this giant cedar-like tail that it uses. Not to mention the other language it uses. It says, he's the chief of the ways of God. Man, he's not only is he big and strong, but he's the chief of the ways of God. That's something that you don't want to mess with. I think you're kind of fine messing with an ox, I guess. But I mean, this guy, God's kind of showing his strength through his creation. Another thing it says is that surely the mountains bring him forth food. Hippopotamus don't go to the mountains to bring food. Other people thought it might be an alligator or a crocodile because they have those big tails. But they don't go to the mountains to get food, nor do they eat grass like an ox. The other thing it says that he trusted that he can drop Jordan into his mouth. Again, that's poetic language. It doesn't say that he can. It says that he trusted that he can. It's the idea. You look at this thing, you're like, yeah, I think that can drink the whole river. We better get out of here. And it doesn't line up with anything else but dinosaurs. It looks like that's what it is. And God's not using this saying, look at this. Imagine if God's saying to Job, Job, can you imagine this terrible creature? It doesn't exist. I just made it up. But that's scary, isn't it? That's crazy. Oh my gosh, God, how wonderful you are. You came up with this thing. That doesn't make any sense. He's saying, look at this thing I've made. Look to it and realize how terrible I am. Not terrible as in like he's terrible as bad, but terrible as in terrifying as in powerful. Look how powerful that thing is. Imagine the one who created it. So it lines up with this. And so this is the biggest long neck ever created, the sauropod, the one that we've discovered. It's called a Dreadnoughtus. And so it is basically the same height as the drop at Jurassic World. It used to be Jurassic Park. So you can imagine, if you've seen it, that thing is huge. Its head reaches to the very top. That's how tall that thing is. It's a Titanosaurus. It's many of sauropods that are really tall. They call them Titanosaurus. So that's how big it is. It's 85 feet tall, which is insane. It's also, let's see exactly how it weighs the same amount as a Boeing 737, which is 130,000 pounds or 65 tons. So that thing is massive. Yeah, that thing can drink up their Jordan. That thing is that's the typical, that's the pinnacle of God's creation right there, which is kind of what God's trying to show to Job. And it lines up with the dinosaur. So to say that God doesn't have dinosaurs in the Bible, I would disagree. We also find another one in Job chapter 41 and verse 1, if you turn there, Job chapter 41, verse 1. And Brother Jason, could you read that also? Read verses 1 through 6, please.
Canst thou draw Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants?
Again, tying back into the way God's explaining this, the same way he did it to Behemoth. Look at this creature I've created, this fearsome creature I've created. Can you make friends with him? Will you say soft words? Will you say soft words to thee? I love that. The way he's kind of toying with Job. Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Can you do these kinds of things with him? This terrible creature, what can you do with this thing? Again, God's showing his power through his creation. If you could skip down, Brother Jason, to verses 15 through 21, please.
His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together, that they cannot be sundered. By his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth.
And we'll talk about this at the next slide. How it looks like he's breathing fire. Again, tying with a dragon as we understand him now. We'll talk about that after. But could you also read verse 33 to end that? Mm-hmm.
Upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear.
Again, showing that these are real creatures. God is pointing to these real creatures. This land animal, Behemoth, massive. You don't want to mess with him. And I created him. And there's also the sea creature, which is more fearsome than any creature that's existed on earth, which we know the largest animals on earth are existing in the sea. And God says, look at this thing. You don't want to mess with that. Also, Leviathan is mentioned all over the Bible. Specifically, it's mentioned in reference to Satan, that crooked serpent, which kind of ties into how did Satan present himself in the garden. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about as a serpent, as a Leviathan or whatever. But he's talking about a real creature. So in reference to this, so a lot of people look at that and they go, Leviathan must be fake. They call it chaos beast. It must be some chaos beast. God saying, I conquered this chaos and the darkness and blah, blah, blah. I don't know how they use that. That doesn't make sense based on this. It looks like he's saying a real thing. Behold, behemoth, and canst thou drive Leviathan? Like he's talking about real creatures, but whatever. They try to make it hyperbolic or try to make it fanciful. Partly because of that fire spewing ability. But yet we see in creation now, there are certain abilities that seem like impossible. You would, if you didn't see it, you wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't be true. I would show a video. There's a cool one that shows all these kind of bioluminescent things. It's really cool. So this one here specifically is a copepod, which can drop bioluminescent depth charges that produce time-release flashes. It's so cool. So what it does, it's just going down underwater, and it shoots out this little thing that comes out, and you don't really notice it, and it goes, poof, it explodes into light. And you're like, what the heck is that? It's shooting off little bombs to get away from things. It's really cool. And you're like, oh, but this thing blows, it looks like it's blowing fire. I can't believe it. And yet we see stuff like that. It's glowing. It's glowing. How does it glow by itself? I don't know. And it shoots off little charges. We also see something like this, which is a tube shoulder fish, which can eject bioluminescent cells when threatened. So it's shooting all this stuff, and it confuses its prey, and if it gets on them, it sticks to them, so now they're glowing, and now they're prey for other predators because they can see them, which is, again, really cool. That's kind of like what you think of fire. That's just stuff spewing out. That's kind of what you're expecting. The other thing is these are electric eels, again, that can shoot electricity. They can produce up to 500 volts of static electricity that can kill a grown human being. I mean, how do you make electricity? How are you making bioluminescence, but this thing can't spew out fire? God can make his creatures do anything, and it's incredible what they can do. It's insane when you look at the animal kingdom, how vast it is and the stuff they can do. And this is a bombardier beetle. So these things spew out, they call it a chemical bomb. It's basically all these chemical things that meet together, shoot out, and it says that explodes from its body at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It just melts their prey. They just sit there and go, it's funny looking. But it's cool. You have to slow it down because it happens so fast. But that's kind of what we expect to see. And so there's been different ideas that people have had about dragons in general, because everybody's fascinated by dragons in terms of the European dragons that fly and have that fire breath they spew out. It is possible for the thing to be like the bombardier beetle, where it has basically two sacs. In those sacs are two different chemicals. That's kind of dumbing it down a little bit. It's more complex than that. But basically, you have two different chemicals. Separate, they don't do anything. As soon as they mix, they cause issues. We know that with stuff like chlorine and acid, and they put those things together. Dangerous, mustard gas. It's basically, that's what it is. As soon as it comes out, it meets together. So you can imagine that if you have the Leviathan, he's just in the water, and he's got these two little sacs in his mouth or whatever, and he comes up and he sees you, and he goes, and he just puts the two chemicals together, they meet, and it lights, and you get fire, or something akin to fire that looks like fire. And it's just something you would expect to see. So to say that Leviathan is fanciful, I would say no. That there are all sorts of things. Again, how would you know that those sacs exist in something like this or something like those different creatures? Based on the fossils, you just won't know. There's a lot of things that dinosaurs could be capable of doing that we have no idea. But I would trust the person who was there. Let's go back to this. Don't look at that. Don't trust that part. The person who was there, who made the foundations of the earth, who laid that, who's the one who created those creatures? He said, I created these creatures, and this is what they can do. God, you don't get it. I know because I use radiocarbon dating. I use radiometric dating. If only you had those tools, God. But that's kind of how we are, right? We use the wisdom of man, but God has all wisdom. The wisdom of the foolishness of God is wiser than men. And yet we're like, I got it all. I got it. And even though the more we look into this, the more we understand there's so little we don't know. I'm sure some of these things you're like, I didn't know those things even existed because there's so much we don't know. And yet God knows it all. And so when he explains it all, I'm going to trust the guy who explains it all and knows it all than the person who doesn't. He's trying to make assumptions. That's why so many people throughout history, and we didn't really talk about those people that much. Yeah, we'll talk about this. So many people throughout history looked to the Bible first, and because of the Bible, they wanted to look into the world and explain it. Man, God made this crazy world. I want to see how he did it. And so many scientists throughout history, and even scientists now, are at least theists or they've been Christians or Catholics or whatever. And because they believe there must be a God, because God explains these things that we can't figure out. These assumptions that we're making, God explains it all. And because he explains it all, I want to see what he's made. And I think that's when we think about what will we do in the new heaven and new earth, I think there's all sorts of things that God's going to have made in that new heaven and new earth. And he's going to want us to show it to us all. See those new creatures I've made. See those new planets. Go explore it. Find out what the things I've made. I've hidden these things for you to find out because that's the kind of stuff we enjoy doing. We like mysteries. We like thrillers, all that kind of stuff. There's so many things that God has made that he'll show us. And God's an infinite God, so there's so much more things he can show us in infinity. So to end our lesson, we'll be looking at what happened to the dinosaurs. Where did they go? Where are they on the ark? There's no way you're going to tell me he's going to get on the ark and he's got to bring his wife with him. I don't think so. He's not going to fit. So what do you guys think? Were dinosaurs on the ark, or do you think they went extinct beforehand? Or do you think they even existed at all? Or, you think so? How are you going to get that on the ark, Brother Jason?
You're not getting that on. Well, the boat is way bigger.
Yeah. Just to let you guys know, this is a cartoon. It's not a real photograph. Yeah. But again, that's a lot of people use stuff like that. We use like, that's ridiculous. But do you know the exact dimensions of the ark? Do you know exactly how big the animals were? So an interesting thing to note, yes, the dinosaurs are humongous. There's no way they could fit on, the dinosaurs that big, they cannot fit on the ark. It's not possible because the big dinosaurs were big, yet the small ones were small. You're not going to get the giant, full-grown adult male on that ark. But God never said you have to get the full-grown adult male. They can bring the little juniors, the little ones. Juniors, is that funny? Little juniors. You can bring those on the ark because the little ones, that's what you're going to have. They're more docile. They're not going to fight with you as much. They're easier to wean off or whatever. Not to mention, how did the animals get on there? Did Noah just go out and let me find 2 of this one and 2 of that one? Maybe he did. But how is he going to tame all those animals? It sounds to me like the God who shut up the lions that Daniel went into, the God who preserved Jonah and the whale, or the fish, the God that's done all these things is able to put those animals on the ark. He's able to get the small ones to go in 2 by 2. He's able to preserve them. What did they eat? How did they get the poop out of there? It must have smelled disgusting. I'm sure it did, yeah. But God can do it. I mean, he's the God who flooded the earth. You think he can't preserve them through it? He made man out of nothing. He formed us out of the dust. But he can't do this. This is too big for God. These dinosaurs are big. They're too big for God. But what does God say to Job? I made these things. If God made those things, he can do it. And it's not like we're making a stretch. Again, not those big things. We're using the small ones. And why couldn't they have been eggs? I don't know. There's any number of reasons I do believe they were on the ark. But then the question becomes, what happened to them? What happened to dinosaurs? If they really existed with mankind, then what happened? Does anybody have a guess? They went into a different planet? I'm just kidding. She didn't say that. Ari's so dumb.
I don't know what the number is. There's so many species that have gone extinct.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what might have caused it.
Yes.
Theories, but easy for them
Mm-hmm.
to go extinct.
Again, look at the fossil record. There's a lot of fossils. We just don't have, those things don't exist anymore. That's all we know about them now in our modern history is those fossil bones. Something existed that looked like that. That's all we know about it. But you can think about something, just think about it logically. Are there any grizzly bears, wild grizzly bears in California today? What happened to them? They just disappeared? We hunted them. We got rid of them. We can expect, why did we get rid of the grizzly bears? Does anyone have an idea? Too dangerous. We want to have civilization here, and these grizzly bears are encroaching on our civilization. It's not safe. We have to kill them off, or we drive them off. The same thing happened to the dinosaurs. You can imagine, again, look at Leviathan, behold, Behemoth, these terrible creatures. You can't mess with those things. Yeah, we don't want to mess with them, so let's get rid of them. We'll drive them off, we'll kill them off, we'll use our weapons, our technology in order to get rid of them. And so you have people like knights or whatever, back in older times, whatever they're called, and they would go out and hunt them. They would drive them off, they'd use them for food. I mean, imagine how much food you can get off of those giant long necks. That's a lot of food for a whole village, for a whole city. The whole kingdom could eat that thing. You know, how'd they have these giant banquets? Well, maybe they ate a dinosaur, I don't know. But they hunted them off, they killed them off, they threw them off, changing the environment. You can imagine how different the world was before the flood versus after the flood. That can be hard for some of those things to adjust. I'm sure some of them may have went extinct at that time. So think about the dodo bird. We hunted the dodo bird, and then it all died off. It couldn't exist anymore because of us. If we caused the extinction of the dodo bird, we can cause the extinction of the dinosaurs. They're dangerous, they're terrible. There could be any number of reasons they went extinct, mostly because of us. Same thing happened with mammoths. Humans get greedy, humans get scared, and humans kill things. American bison, yeah, it almost went extinct. I mean, those things, they ran, it sounded like earthquakes going by, people said. And now it doesn't sound nearly anything like that, which is sad. Of course, we'd love to see that. This is where we'll end. They like that one. A coelacanth. It's a fossilized fish. This thing, scientists believed, went extinct 65 million years ago. Again, that's what could we know by fossils? They dated it, using the rock that's next to the rock that the fossil's inside. And they dated it to this 65 million years ago. And they used this was an index fossil that they used all over the world. If you find animals within, or fossils within this strata that had this fish, you knew it was at least 65 million years old. Interestingly enough, though, it still exists today. In 1938, a fisherman discovered it on the coast of Madagascar. He just pulled it up and he's like, what the heck is this thing? I've never seen this thing before. They found out, they go, look at it. Wait a minute. This thing looks just like the other thing we had. And so can you imagine what they thought? Oh, we thought it died 65 million years ago. Their first thought was, It must have lived for 65 million years. It survived every extinction event and just came, it's still alive. Incredible. Which is crazy to me. Instead of saying the dating methods must be wrong, it must have died a lot sooner than 65 million years ago and it's still around, that's why it's still around. They said it must have survived 65 million years ago. I don't know, it's crazy to me. And that's a fossil. It's a living fossil is what they say. We saw that fossil, it must be dead. Yet it's still alive today. And so, and we have, this is the cool thing about this. This fish, we have fossils of it next to dinosaurs, which means this thing existed next to dinosaurs, and this thing is still alive today. So what are the odds that maybe there are dinosaurs alive today, or that we existed along this thing, as we do now, with dinosaurs along this thing? I mean, that's the conclusion I'd come to, but they come to the opposite. Why? Because what they'll say is, it couldn't possibly have been young, and it couldn't have possibly existed with humans and dinosaurs, because dinosaurs we know are millions of years old. We know it. Again, making that assumption, because I assume the Earth is old, therefore this evidence can't point to what you guys are saying, it must point to what I'm saying, because it's based on assumptions. If you assume the Earth is old, you will make it old, even in the face of fossils still being alive. Exactly, which again comes down to your worldview. If your worldview shapes your life, and your worldview gets turned upside down, what is it going to do to you? That's a scary thought. It's a scary thought for even us. I'm sure some of you have felt that, like, someone's showing me this thing that looks like it's contrary to what I believe. And that can be very terrifying. But we don't believe what we believe because it feels good. Or at least we shouldn't. We shouldn't come here to church and come to believe in God because the Bible, I believe it's true because I believe it in my heart. I believe it in my heart. The Mormons believe in their heart that their Bible is true. They call it the burning of the bosom. I prayed to God and I asked him, is Mormonism true? And he said, yes. I guess it's true, my bad. No, we believe this is true because it is true. Because objective truth exists. And if objective truth exists, then we have to find it. Where does it lead? And it leads to this. If you look at the evidence, this is where it leads. But there are people who don't want to see that. They want to say, I determine objective truth, therefore this must be this because I want it to be true. And that's what we'll find later on. Next week, we'll look at abiogenesis, that is life from non-life. Again, we'll see more assumptions, more presuppositions, all that kind of stuff, where it just doesn't line up with reality because they want to change reality because it doesn't work with their framework, which is, it's a sad thing because we're like, man, we got the truth right here. And they go, I don't want the truth, I want something else. But that something else, it's not going to fill that truth because the truth leaves a void. If you don't have it, all you have is lies, and you don't want to live on lies.